What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, July 6th, 2018. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. And actually for a Friday, especially after a holiday, it's been a very, very busy news day. And we've got just oodles and oodles of stuff in the talking points here. So let's get right on into it. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments and questions. And because she was with us on the 4th of July, the Lady Claire is not going to be with us in hour number 3 today. Those of you watching on YouTube can see that we have not reconfigured the room here. She's taking the day to work on some of her music. She's writing a new original piece for her church choirs, and that's a good thing for her to be doing right now. And so let's get on into the news here. Now, do you remember that big stink that happened down in San Antonio, Texas at a Whataburger, where this 16-year-old kid, Hunter Richard, was wearing a Make America Great Again hat, and this 30-year-old gentleman threw his drink into the kid's face and then grabbed the hat, including some of the kid's head, and ran out of the Whataburger. But somebody got it on video and it went viral, and here's the follow-up. The man was recognized and identified as Kino Jimenez by his own employer, who fired him and then reported him to the police. So he's been arrested. And I understand that Donald Trump Jr. Is in the process of getting a replacement Make America Great hat for Hunter Richard, and he's going to have Trump sign this one for him. So that's working out very well. Again, getting into this issue of incivility, it has been going on for a while, but it is accelerating here. And there's this video that surfaced from Denmark where this man was wearing a Make America Great hat in what was called the Unibar near Aarhus University in Denmark. And so this American liberal became visibly angry and started screaming at him, calling him a racist, using obscenities and profanities, and they got that one on videotape as well. And they did press charges against her for politically motivated assault, which is what we're going to have to do. Turn the other cheek isn't going to work on this. So over at Breitbart, they're running what they call the rap sheet. And the rap sheet is basically keeping account and description of all of these acts of media and Democrat-approved violence and harassment against Trump supporters, and they're continuously updating it. It was up to 133 as of when I linked it to whatreallyhappened.com, and for all we know, it's been updated even more since then. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and take a peek because now I'm curious. No, it's still showing the original 133, but it's looking at all these things about, well, it includes the one about the kid getting assaulted in San Antonio for his hat, the Nebraska GOP office vandalized, the man who was threatening to kill Senator Rand Paul and his family, and it just goes on and on. And again, resorting to these kind of brown shirt tactics is sending a signal that the liberal agenda, especially the open borders agenda, don't have any arguments that are getting any traction. So they're trying to win through intimidation, win through terrorism, win through harassment. And I think it's going to backflash on them for a very simple reason, because I think most people are looking at this behavior and saying, wow, if this is how they behave when they're out of power, imagine how they're going to behave if they ever get back in. And that may be one of the reasons why the polls are shifting against the Democrats for the midterms this November. Now, interestingly enough, New York Times ran an article about how liberals used to be identified with freedom of speech, that they could say whatever they wanted to, because we have that First Amendment. And now all of a sudden we're seeing a lot of liberal stars coming on back and saying, well, really, there do have to be limits. And what's going on here is back when they were champions of free speech, it worked for them because they had ideas, because they really were the intellectual class. And they really did have suggestions for doing things that would benefit the nation. They've run out of that. They ran out of ideas in 2016, and all they've got now is hysteria, identity politics, victimology, race baiting, and so we're seeing all these people out there saying, well, you know, I think that free speech amplifies injustice because it's being used to defend ideas that I don't like. So that's it. Basically, their idea of injustice is anybody having a different opinion than they do about everything. Now, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. But one law professor at Georgetown, Louise Michael Seidman, who used to be a defender of free speech, is saying his past position was a mistake. And he said when he was a kid, that was the standard liberal view of civil liberties. And now he's saying it's a mistake to think of free speech as an effective means to accomplish a more just society. So that is the new subtext coming from the liberals, that a just society requires censorship and officially approved speech. Now you think about that one for a while, and then you go back to that question. What are they going to do if they get back into power? Now, Federal District Judge Ellen Houville has tossed a junk lawfare lawsuit by the DNC, claiming that the Trump camp and Roger Stone colluded with Russia during campaign. And the judge said the evidence just wasn't there. It was an accusation only, and the prosecutors were not going to be able to make the case. And by the way, this judge was appointed under Clinton. So they must have, the prosecutors must have really messed up for the judge to say there's no there. And Roger Stone is now out there celebrating his victory, blasting the deep state and the DNC hacks following the dismissal of this lawsuit against him in the Trump campaign. Now, Devin Nunes is starting to really crank on up. It's going to be an interesting time in Congress over the next several weeks. And Nunes has sent another letter, his third in a week, to two fellow GOP chairmen, referring to them, a total of 15 people connected with the Russian investigation, for testimony in open doors. And the letters, many of the individuals on the list are tied to Hillary Clinton and the Trump dossier, which was funded in part by Clinton's presidential campaign and the Democratic National Committee. So he's going to give them a good grilling. It's going to be in public. Nunes is expanding his visa abuse probe. And Nunes is going to call on Bruce Orr's wife, Nellie Orr, co-founder of Fusion GPS, Glenn Simpson, and Feinstein's former Senate Intel staffer, who is a Fusion GPS employee, Daniel Jones, are also on the list. All righty. So a lot of people were wondering what was behind this smearing of Jim Jordan, where all of a sudden the media came on out with these allegations that before he'd gotten into politics, when he was still a coach at Ohio State, that he had ignored reports of abuse against the students. And people were scratching their head about the timing. What's really going on here? And there's a very good article that came out over at Freedom Outpost, which has connected all the dots to say, this is Rod Rosenstein sending a message to members of Congress saying that he will investigate them all, he will find their dirt, and he will get it on out there before the midterms if they don't back off on him and the Robert Mueller investigation. In other words, he's blackmailing Congress. Now, as you know, we're coming up on the summit between Donald Trump and Vlad Putin. And Kremlin officials are already in intense negotiations with their counterparts in Washington to strike at least one deal they hope will let President Trump tout his summit with Putin as a triumph that justifies steps to repair relations. Now, the meeting is going to take place on July 16th in Helsinki, Finland. And one of the issues that's probably going to come on up, at least on Trump's side, is Iran's role in Syria, an issue that Moscow is also negotiating with Tehran. Now, Putin has agreed in principle to U.S. and Israeli demands that Iranian-backed forces in southern Syria be kept away from Israel's borders, replaced with troops loyal to the government in Damascus. But then we're getting an alternative report coming out of no less than TASS, saying that the Kremlin is saying that no, the pro-Iranian pullout, they're refuting, saying it will not be the top of the Putin-Trump talks. So already we've got everybody in there trying to pre-spin this. There are people who want this summit to work. I'm one of them. There are people who don't want the summit to work. Specifically the arms manufacturers, the war hawks. Israel. Now, as you know, back on Wednesday, there was an arrest for a planned terror event. And there was this man who was caught plotting a bombing at a 4th of July celebration and then arrested by the FBI, and it went to the newspapers. See, the FBI are the good guys. The only problem is the plot was created by the undercover FBI agents who convinced the man to agree to a role in the plan. They gave him all the supplies, and then they arrested him. Now, the guy is 48 years old, Demetrius Pitts, and he's facing these criminal charges after conversations with undercover agents led to his arrest. And the FBI is claiming its agents reached out to him because they made comments on Facebook that indicated he might be interested in joining Al-Qaeda and traveling overseas for training, then returning to the U.S. to carry out an attack. A very stupid thing to put on Facebook, knowing that it's all being surveilled, or maybe it was planted on his behalf. But we've seen so many of these that even the corporate media is starting to say, this is kind of wanky. NBC came on out and said, it's clear there was no indication he actually planned on carrying out a terrorist attack. There's no indication he would have carried off any attack on his own. Now, as you know, the FBI is coming out of under criticism because this is entrapment. They're entrapping these people. Now, the FBI Special Agent in Charge, Stephen Anthony, tried to justify this by insisting that law enforcement can't stand by and wait for Mr. Pitts to commit a violent attack. You know, I mean, we have to force the issue now. We just can't wait and see if he's going to commit a crime. Well, that's the way it's supposed to work. That's the way it's supposed to work in the United States of America. You go on out and you catch the people, hopefully in the act or shortly after the act of committing a crime. You don't go on out and talk them into it, give them the supplies, and then arrest them and claim you're doing something to solve the terrorism problem, because you're not. Now, Max Boot is a longtime big shot on the Council of Foreign Relations, leading figure in the neoconservative movement. And I guess the Russia thing has had its day, because the new issue now is we're all Nazis. Trump is Hitler. Trump's GOP is the Nazi party. Everybody who supports Donald Trump is a Nazi. That's their latest thing. You're all Nazis, Nazis, Nazis. Or your other really bad names, which I can't say on the radio because the FCC will shut us down here. So it's just more screaming and hollering. And if you look at the tactics being used by the liberals, the brown shirt tactics being used by the liberals right now, I think that Max Boot may be looking in the wrong direction. So apparently, this war between the globalists and the populist nationalists is really heating up. And Trump apparently is the figurehead for the populists and nationalists. Now, more and more countries are starting to elect populists, nationalists, Eurosceptics, but Trump is apparently being seen as the focal point, and that's why they're still out to get him any way they can. So let's get on over to the walkaway movement, because it is really taking off, and a lot of people are connecting with it. Now, this was basically all goes back to this video created by this gay hairdresser in New York named Brandon Straka, where he said, I used to be a liberal, but I can't do that anymore. And he went down the list of reasons, including the growing intolerance and hysteria and violence in the liberal world, and how there didn't seem to be any kind of spiritual growth. It was just constant whining and crying. And the idea that in order to be a liberal, you have to be a victim of somebody who's hated by the liberals. And this thing really took off. Now, as a follow-up to that, Brandon Straka, his video has been seen by so many people, he's now being recognized in the streets. So he went into a camera store yesterday to purchase some new supplies. Apparently he's into photography. And the liberals working in the store recognized him and refused him service. These are the same liberals who scream, you know, to high heaven when a Christian baker refuses to make a gay wedding cake. But this type of hatred and discrimination is precisely why Brandon Straka began the walkaway campaign in the first place. All right, let's take a phone call. Don in the Philippines, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. I got a couple points. One is this Mueller investigation. Now, I haven't heard that as Rosenstein, today was supposed to be the deadline. Did he also say today, go to hell, he's not going to give him anything, or what happened today?
I have not heard anything. Today is the deadline, and supposedly Rosenstein has until end of business today to surrender the documents, but I have not heard that the documents have delivered or that Rosenstein had issued a comment on it. My gut is telling me that the documents will not be delivered, because if they start to really open up that can of worms, there's going to be no stopping it. It's going to unravel all the way back to the election fraud of 2016, the attempt to frame Trump with Russia will rip open all the way back to Hillary's email server, the Clinton Foundation, and that whole entire rotted tumor at the heart of Washington, D.C. is going to be exposed to the American people.
Well, that's what we need. But the thing is, there's another thing. What happens is they can vote, the House can vote contempt of Congress on Rosenstein, which they should do. But
they could also impeach him.
What they say is, well, we just have, well, they can vote to impeach him, but it takes 2/3 of the Senate, I believe, to impeach him. So that's not going to happen. So,
well, the House does the actual impeachment, and then the Senate votes to remove. That's why Bill Clinton got impeached.
They won't remove him.
Yeah, Bill Clinton got impeached, but he was not removed.
Right. With Rosenstein, I don't think he cares. I mean, you know, he wore that like a badge of honor. He still, after all that would happen, he'd still be sitting there in his job drawing a paycheck, right? But here's the thing they can do, Mike, and you don't hear this very much, but I saw Tom Fitton said something about this on his Judicial Watch comments, but I heard this before also.
Okay, Don, I'm going to have to put you on hold. We got to take a break for commercials. Do not hang up, and I'll come right back to you after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And folks, Republic Broadcasting does need your help. There's no other way to put it. We need to stay on the air. We're in a very critical time in the history of the nation, and Republic Broadcasting needs your help. So if you can help, the postal address to send check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity, cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Road, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. If you'd like to call in with a credit card donation or debit card donation, the number, or to pledge to be a recurring subscriber, that number is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. All right, let's get back to the phones. Don in the Philippines, sorry to cut you off with a commercial break here, and why don't you just pick up where you left off?
Well, for example, the House held Eric Holder in contempt. Well, he just laughed about it, and ha ha ha. He held me in contempt because he knows that the DOJ is not going to prosecute him, and now he's going to run for president. So it means nothing whatsoever to just hold somebody in contempt. But there's something else they can do that the Congress used to do a long time ago. They could just, if they vote for contempt of Congress, they can go put the man under arrest, a cabinet member. And the Congress used to do this. They have a sergeant of arms of the Congress, of the House, and they could just send him over there, cuff Rosenstein, and they have some kind of a jail in there somewhere.
Yeah, they do. There's actually a small cell block there in the basement of the Capitol building.
They could do it, but that's something, I'm pretty sure that law still exists where they have the authority to do that, but they just don't exercise their authority because the deep state rules, and they're not going to have enough intestinal fortitude or whatever you want to call it. They're just they don't care enough to. But they could do that. They could go over there. Rosenstein, you wouldn't expect that. I mean, he's not going to have guards around him. You can go there and cuff him and throw him in jail. Now what's he going to do? And detain him?
Well, here's an overview of what's going on. What all of them are doing, members of Congress, FBI, Department of Justice, all of them are putting on a theater production to try and convince the American people that the government is still functioning along the lines as laid out in the Constitution. They're aware that Americans are hearing about the deep state, that they're seeing the corruption, they're watching as Congress abandoned its oversight for wars, they're seeing the obvious way in which the Department of Justice and FBI are openly defying Congress, and so everybody's out there trying to just go through the motions and say, no, everything's still working, go on voting, go on paying taxes. It's all still working the way it's supposed to. But I think they're running out of time.
Yes, they're running out of time, and people don't believe anything they say anymore. And now, as far as the walk-away movement, I'm a walk-away movement. I walked away when they screwed Bernie and they nominated Hillary Clinton. I'm never going to vote for another Democrat, I don't think, as long as I live, unless there's somebody that I think is pretty cool, but I don't see any around.
I'd vote for Tulsi Gabbard.
Well, yeah, she's not going to run. And she runs in Hawaii. She's not going to ever be a candidate. But
why? We had one president come from Hawaii.
I grew up in a Democratic.
Why not another?
Yeah, well, anything's possible, but yeah, I'd vote for Tulsi Gabbard. She's not going to. I don't think she's going to be a candidate, but just because she'd be better to look at if you get to turn on the TV and you can look at her, instead of these guys they got there. But I grew up as a Democrat, and one thing I liked about the Democrats over the years, they tended to be more of a peace, the peace party. But Jimmy Carter didn't invade anybody in his 4 years, which is unusual. George McGovern was a peace candidate. He was a guy that was a combat veteran of many bombing missions in Germany, and he knew what it was, and he didn't like war, and he was against the Vietnam War, but he only won one state. But now the Democrats are just nothing but total transgender and this and that, and they're not even the working men. I used to be a union worker. I was worked for the post office, and most of those people even the ones that were devout union members, they were not Democrats, because the Democrats were just all hogwash, and they don't really stick up for the working man anymore. I'll let you go, Mike. Thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. And yeah, I mean, a lot of people are starting to ask, is the Democratic Party in the process of self-destructing? And yeah, and a lot of that has to do with surrendering the party to the corruptions coming out of the Clintons. I mean, basically, Hillary Clinton was running the entire Democratic machine during her campaign, which is what led to cheating Bernie Sanders out of his primary victory. Anyway, we got to take another break for commercials. We have more callers waiting on the line, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go back to the phone lines to Jim in Chicago. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. A couple of things. You were talking about liberal and their behavior. This is nothing new. Don't you remember SDS, the weathermen, in the Day of Rage in Chicago in 1969?
Yes. Yeah, but those were perceived by the American public as kind of either isolated groups or an isolated incident. The perception today is that all of liberalism has just gone off the deep end here, and I think it's as liberalism started to lose traction with the American people, their only solution was to get more and more extreme, to where we get, screaming about gay wedding cakes and how it's okay for a man to use the women's restroom and stuff that most Americans just find absolutely silly. In fact, I'll share a little example with you. The other weekend when Claire and I decided to go on out and play tourist and get away from our computers and everything for a day, we visited one of our favorite places on the island, which is called the Byodo Inn Temple. And Claire went in to use the restroom, and I was standing outside waiting for her. And a lady tourist comes along, and the restrooms are not all that clearly marked, and she went into the men's room by accident, and then immediately comes on out, red-faced, and I point her to the correct one. And then I say, according to the liberals, you could use the men's room if you want. And she broke up in laughter, which made two things. She was aware of the issue, and she just thought it was silly. And that's where regular middle America is right now. They're seeing it silly. My big concern right now, though, is not whether liberalism is going to survive or collapse. I think it's going to collapse. My concern is they pushed out to such an extremist position that during the backlash, we're going to have to be careful that we don't wind up with an extremist conservative society either. We have to sort of slow things down and try and get back to that middle of the road where we're avoiding extremism on either side.
I would agree with you. In fact, personally, up until probably the early 80s, I supported the Democratic Party. Now, I don't even support the Republican Party because I think they both are bad, and most people are turned off by them, unfortunately.
Yes, they are. And that's one of the reasons Trump did so well, is that he was seen as being an outsider. Unfortunately, he's turned out to be a bit of a disappointment. But there's always been a lot of support for third parties through the years, but the system is rigged against them. Don't want any third parties coming on in and messing up, the great little racket they've got going there. But throughout my life, I never really, I was obviously growing up on a farm in New Hampshire. I was raised in a Republican environment. But as I got into my voting years, I tended to basically vote the issues and the individuals. And I was never one to have a strong party allegiance. But I'm in agreement with you. Both parties are equally corrupt. We're talking about how the Democrats cheated Bernie Sanders out of the nomination in the primaries. But we have to remember just how hard the Republican leadership tried to do exactly the same thing to Donald Trump.
This is very true. And the final question I have for you, did you read that article today or heard about that article stating where the military is asking any soldier that was born or raised in another country and they join the military to become American citizens, they now are asked to leave the military?
Okay, so I did know that one of the pathways to citizenship being offered to the refugees and illegals was through service in the U.S. military, and I always criticized that plan as the people weren't emotionally connected to the land and they weren't going to be effective fighters. But you're saying now that the people who went into the military on this arrangement are now being asked to leave?
That came out this morning, yeah.
Wow. I guess I was right. They aren't effective fighters.
So, but no, the
beat the
Defense
curve
Department
again.
are saying. Say it again, please.
I said I beat the curve again.
Right. So that's where it stands as far as today. Anything can change, though.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, you and Claire have a nice weekend. Take care.
Yeah. We're going to get a lot of rest here, and Claire, of course, has church on Sunday. Thank you for the call. We're going to switch over to Al in Canada. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, you beat the curve again. That was funny. I was chuckling. I sent you an email, something that got me banned on the CBC. And, you know, like you said about these liberals, I mean, this is getting ridiculous. You know, they're doing it to themselves, right? There's nothing that anyone can really, you know, say otherwise. I'm a pretty conservative guy on certain issues, but you know, like censorship, free speech, things like that. I mean, you know, like look at some of these books that are actually being used in high school. They're not using that anymore. In the high school curriculum because of the racial connotations. If anything, I think that it would probably reinforce the fact that, you know, like racism is a bad thing. I mean, and it shouldn't be tolerated, but by all means, I mean, you know, the free speech should not be censored to the point where, you know, you don't even know, you know, like how would I say this? You don't even know what's right or wrong anymore as far as the conversation is concerned, because you can't really say anything anymore without offending people. It's gotten ridiculous.
It's cultural Marxism, yeah. And see, it's one thing to say racism is bad today, and it is, and quite another to try and apply censorship to make it look like there has never been racism in the past. Well, if you really want to make the point that racism is bad, I think students should be exposed to the literature of the past that did have the racial stereotypes. And you can say, you know, this was the context in which this was written, and this is the reality of what happened. And we're in a world right now where the liberals are playing like Winston Smith, where their job is to go back and change the past to bring it into compliance to current political dogma. And Orwell wrote that as a warning, and we should have paid more attention because we're there.
Yeah, but they're going a step further, because now they're imposing do it or else sort of thing. Look at Tim Allen. Tim Allen's series was canceled.
Yes.
And his, you know, he's a conservative, and the show is based upon, you know, conservative values. He got canceled, and
yes.
He didn't even say anything bad. He didn't go up in front of a bunch of people and say, you know, F Trump or anything like that, which is like, you know, that's your president, buddy. You know, I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous, and I'm hoping that liberalism does collapse. It is collapsing up here in Canada. In Ontario, the Liberal Party got like 1 seat. And the Conservative Party, I think, got 80, and then, you know, the Socialists, the NDPs or Communists, whatever you want to call them, you know, they got like in the 30s. And next year, of course, we have the federal election, and Justin Trudeau's, you know, his numbers are bad, and that's great because, you know, to be quite honest with you, Mike, when someone says mankind, it doesn't bother me at all. But when someone says people kind, you know, I'm like, what? What kind of nonsense is that? They're actually rewriting the English language too, aren't they?
Well, yeah. Yeah, and that's a process if they change, again, back to Orwell, the whole idea behind newspeak. Mm-hmm. If there isn't a word for a banned concept, then nobody can think about the banned concept.
Exactly. I appreciate your time, Mike. I hope you have a good show. I've been having some trouble connecting to your website the last week. It's okay now, but for about a half an hour, it wasn't there. So, hopefully it gets resolved and you have trouble with your internet service provider. So,
okay,
good luck
can
to
I ask you,
will you get... Thank you very much.
Hang on, Al, were you getting the page not found?
Yeah.
Okay, that was actually, we had a new advertiser and they had some really bad code in there, and it took me a while to track it down, and even worse, I discovered that the advertiser was very underhandedly leading people to an online gambling website, which we absolutely forbid at What Really Happened. So I've canceled that advertiser and I've taken the ad out, and if you empty your browser cache and reload, it should be working now.
Yeah, it works now. That's
okay.
Great. Well, these people are underhanded, and they'll do anything.
Yep.
So, what can you do? Anyways, I appreciate your time, Mike. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks an awful lot, and we're going to switch over to Bob behind enemy lines. Aloha, Bob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Boy, I'll tell you, I'm almost jealous of where you're at out there. I was just looking at your weather, 84 degrees, 55% humidity, and partly sunny.
Yep.
Man, it's just too bad they banned most of your sunblock now. Did you hear about that?
Well, yeah, the stuff really was bad, and, just covering up is going to protect you, or staying in the shade. But, suntan oil, it's another product that was created for something that was kind of made up. And some of its marketing was a little bit underhanded. So there are natural sunscreens that you can use. Once again, it was a product where everybody was out there trying to make their own unique patentable formula, and there was a lot of stuff being put in there.
Well, I'm sure because you're old enough that it was just a replacement for Mom's cocoa butter and the aloe vera plant. We all knew that. Hey, I didn't want to drag you off in the weeds there. I was just complimenting your weather. Actually, I wanted to wonder about this new bill that Trump has drafted. I'm sure you've heard, I hate to be Krause here, but you maybe caught wind of his new and fair and reciprocal tariff act. Do you think he's blowing smoke at the World Trade Organization, or do you think he's trying to make a stink? Sorry, there's my sense of humor again.
I'm not really sure. I'm trying to figure out if it really is a case of bluffing and having your bluff called, which may be the case with China, or if Trump doesn't really understand that it's going to take a while to get our manufacturing back online for a tariff trade currency war to actually work. And then behind it all, of course, is that horrendous debt, which means our economy is not that resilient. Frankly, after that comment about where, despite being advised not to, Trump told the president of Colombia that they're seriously thinking of invading Venezuela, I'm starting to question Trump's judgment.
I would have to agree with that. I was in the Navy, and that is a severe tactical faux pas.
Yes.
I mean, it's one thing to go over to another brigade and say, hey, guys, maybe you want to clean up your act, or we're going to have to go over here and clean up the village. But it's another thing to say it to another country, an entire country, and not even the country you're talking about going into. No, just telling the neighbors, oh, and by the way, no, that was really dumb.
Yeah, it is, because it guarantees that Venezuela now knows that the U.S. is a serious military threat to them.
Well, I kind of look at it as the way that we're going to be looking at China. You can use Venezuela as a very good example right now. Their entire economy has crumbled. Their entire system has crashed and fallen apart. Even the pigeons are running out of places to get eaten in right now. And all of a sudden, now they get to deal with an outside force in much greater numbers and much more massive power that's getting ready to come in there and tell them what to do.
Yep.
I think we're going to wind up the same way with China if we're not really careful.
Well, there is no question in my mind that Venezuela will be taken very quickly because they've been suffering under years of economic warfare by the United States, because Venezuela wants to sell their oil for currencies other than the U.S. dollar. And this goes back to the times of Hugo Chavez. They were trying to get him out of power. And so, the reason Venezuela is falling apart is they have also been hit with U.S. sanctions and literally starved into submission. And it's just one more case where
when the sanctions went down. I was telling my friends when the sanctions went down, that was the first sign I saw. I said, look, guys, you got to watch Venezuela over the next couple of years. You'll see what I mean.
Yep.
Some of them doubted me with all this tinfoil hat stuff, but I'm an infophile. I look everywhere, all over the news. I'll listen to CNN. I'll listen to you guys. I'll listen to everybody else. I know what I believe, but I want to hear everybody's opinion. I'm a very well-rounded character trying to get the bigger picture. But, you know, in the bigger picture, one of your callers, Al, there earlier, I really do have to agree with him. This Democrat and Liberal Party is just so busy tearing themselves apart. I'm almost thinking we could save a whole lot of campaign finance money on Republicans this year. All we need to do is film back the Democrats' behavior and then pop it out there on TV.
Well, the problem is that we're already seeing the corporate social media are yanking this stuff. People are putting up these videos.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, when I went on over to Breitbart for that rap sheet, I was surprised that they had 133 separate incidents on there. I was only aware of like maybe 5 or 6. So we'd have to grassroots it.
I've been keeping up on it.
We'd have to grassroots it. We'd have to have our own video servers and just get the stuff on out there. And with my new server, I may be able to host a few videos myself.
Real.video. I'll tell you, if you need a good place to be, Mike Adams
I'm going to be looking at that this weekend. I'm going to be looking at that this weekend. I got nothing but complaints about YouTube, about how they keep cutting me off. They're throwing commercials on top of my streaming video. And
well, they've been skipping like 10 seconds of your script at a time.
Yep.
I mean, you're getting censored on there sentence by sentence sometimes.
Well, okay, well, blank YouTube then. But yeah, I'm going to be looking at real video. I'm going to be looking at real video over the weekend in my copious amounts of free time.
Well, as long as you help Claire get that song done by Sunday so that she can freshen that up into the church halls, I think you'll probably have done most of your job. But yeah, check out real video too. In the meantime, brother, I really look forward to hearing your news, so I'm going to shut up and let you tell me what the news is. All
right, well, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go, and I'm going to leave our next caller until after the coming commercial break. The piece of music Claire's working on right now is not for this weekend, but there is other stuff for the weekend, special music, rehearsals, and so there's a lot of stuff to get done. We'll get it done, though. I'm going to really get that. But I'm going to look at real video because YouTube, I get complaints about the sound quality. I get complaints about censorship. And it's time to basically let YouTube and their little liberal world fade into history. Okay, we're going to take another break for commercials. We're going to come back with a phone call, and then we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're going to take one more phone call, then we're going to close the phone lines for a while because I'm way behind on the talking points. So, Peter in Los Angeles, thank you for being so patient on the hold button, and what is on your mind today? Peter, are you there? Peter going once, going twice. And I guess we lost Peter. All right. The phone lines are closed. I'm going to do some news here. Somebody just sent me an article, and it's a follow-up to the article the caller mentioned about how the Army is now discharging the immigrants. And the liberals have already gone ballistic on this, screaming it's racism. They're being discharged because they are immigrants. And looking at this story here, apparently there are some problems. It has to do with some of them lying on the requirements, being overweight, not being physically fit for military service. In the case of some who were being assigned to jobs requiring clearance, they couldn't pass the background check. But the liberals are out there screaming, racism, 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 racism. All right, getting on back to our domestic politics here. As you know, Scott Pruitt, the former head of the Environmental Protection Agency, has left. He still has all these scandals and investigations to deal with. I'm looking at the scope of this guy's misbehavior. and wondering why he wasn't called to account long ago, maybe when he was back still as the Attorney General of Oklahoma, because I don't think he just started behaving like this when he came to the Environmental Protection Agency. This suggests to me a constant pattern of this kind of behavior. So, and anyway, so a lot of people are saying that as of Monday, the assistant EPA chief, Andrew Wheeler, will be running the EPA on a temporary basis. And already a lot of people are screaming about it because he used to be a coal lobbyist. And apparently he also worked as an aide to Senator Jim Inhofe, who is not well loved by the global warming cultists. So they're attacking Wheeler, and it's not like EPA has been doing a really great job, and that's another issue entirely, possibly for another show. Getting into corporate media, looking at the ratings, Fox News again dominated for the second quarter of 2018, not only in cable news, but in all of cable, while CNN landed in last place by a country mile. Because nobody likes a liar. Meanwhile, over in France, there are two controversial bills which are headed to the French Senate to enable the government to censor fake news. And critics are correctly pointing on out. This means the news will be the official news. It'll be like Pravda and Izvestia under the old Soviet Union. It won't be true. It'll be all government lies, but they'll be the official lies, and you will love them. All right, we got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are closed because I got a lot of news to get through, and I'm going to be going pretty fast here. So we're talking about the Great Britain. We're talking about Trump's upcoming visit, and already it's off to a rocky start because apparently somebody has put together this giant balloon portraying Donald Trump as a baby. It's not very flattering, and it's been given permission to fly over London during Trump's visit. This at the same time the London police ban a pro-Trump rally. And Facebook has deleted the Make Britain Great Again page. It's getting very heavy-handed out there. Okay, now let's get into the war zones. A lot of stuff going on over there. The Syrian army has retaken multiple points on the border with Jordan. And there was an attempt to try and get some peace talks going. But the Damascus government and local militant groups failed to reach any kind of fully fledged reconciliation agreement that would allow things to settle in the area. A lot of people are talking peace. Some are successful, some less so. So yesterday, the Syrian Arab Army, the Tiger forces and their allies, liberated the town of Saida and the nearby abandoned air defense base in the process of Daraa. According to pro-government sources, the SAA faced a little resistance during their operation along the border, and Russian troops were also spotted there. So the peace talks have failed. The Syrian army has resumed their military operation across Daraa, basically going after the areas still remaining under terrorist occupation. Now, over 35,000 civilians are fleeing the terrorist-held regions in southern Syria toward the army positions. Now, it may seem that that's a very obvious thing to do, but you need to go back to when they were trying to sell you the war in Syria in the first place. And they kept trying to convince you. The people of Syria hate Assad. They hate the Syrian army. They love and support these opposition groups. That was what they were called back then, before it was realized that, you know, the Syrian people love these. They're afraid of the army. Well, obviously not. Once again, we are finding out that this war was sold to us with lies, fraud, and deception. Meanwhile, up in Raqqa, a U.S. and French military convoy has entered the Raqqa air base to confront a popular uprising. Now, this is something that has been building in recent weeks, where ordinary people of Syria, not the armed forces, not these various funded terrorist groups, but the people in Syria have had it with the U.S. and its allies mucking about in their country. And so the U.S. is in there basically trying to put down this popular uprising. They've imposed military curfews on all the local towns, trying to keep people in their homes. But it's a real issue. Nobody in Syria wants the U.S. there, except the terrorist groups who are being funded and supported by the U.S. Now, one of the reasons Raqqa has this popular uprising is yet another mass grave of civilians killed by the U.S. airstrikes has been uncovered in Raqqa. Over 300 civilians have been buried in this grave. So that's why the people of Syria want the U.S. gone. They don't want to get bombed. They don't want to get buried in a mass anonymous grave. Meanwhile, the U.S. is dispatching more military aid to the Syrian Democratic Forces in Hasaka, which is one of their U.S.-backed opposition groups with a name that makes it look like they're the good guys. And analysts are saying the U.S. is going to try and disintegrate Syria by means of the Kurdish militias deployed in the northern and northeastern parts of the country. So the plan to split off a big chunk of Syria, and by the way, it is the chunk with all the oil and gas, is apparently still on the table. Now, Assad has apparently come to an agreement with the Kurds, which may make that option, may take that option off the table. And Assad's forces and the Kurds working together want to push the Turks out of Syria. Syria doesn't want to go. They are sending more arms and men up to that area. Meanwhile, Israeli forces have attacked the Syrian military near the occupied Golan Heights. They fired missiles, which they described as retaliatory, toward the positions of the pro-government National Defense Forces in the Al-Quneitra Governorate this afternoon. According to NDF sources, the IDF struck the positions near the government stronghold of Khan Amabeh, causing material damage to an outpost. No casualties reported. The IDF justified this attack on the pro-government troops, claiming it was retaliation for a single mortar shell landing inside the occupied Golan Heights, hitting an empty patch of dirt. We have seen this one before. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. But the world is finally beginning to take note of what's going on and speak out. Moscow is calling for the lifting of unilateral coercive measures imposed on the Syrians. The ambassador of Venezuela has stated, "We stand by Syria in its war against terrorism." Cuban Minister of Foreign Trade and Investment Rodrigo Malmirza Diaz said backing Syria is a firm Cuban decision. So everybody is choosing sides on this one. Now, according to this story in Al Jazeera, rebels in southern Syria reach a deal to end violence. Now, this is separate from the one up in Daraa that collapsed and led to more fighting. This one basically involved a key crossing point with Jordan. This is one of the Jordan areas. Basically, the fighters are handing over their heavy weapons in return for a government pullout from several villages. In other words, everybody is going to deconflict. So that's a little bit of good news. Meanwhile, now that it's very obvious that Bashar al-Assad is not going to be removed from power, absent an assassination or decapitation strike, Israel is now out there starting to lay down the red lines for post-war relations with Syria. And Israel's main concern is trying to keep Iran as far away from its borders as possible, along with Hezbollah. And so Israel is saying that they want Syrian forces near the border with the Golan And as far as I know, Syria is saying they don't really have a problem with that. But it's quite a turnaround from just a few years ago when Israeli leaders were publicly predicting Assad's overthrow, and some voices even mused about peace with a future democratic Syria. Now, there's a bit of propaganda right there because Syria is a democracy. They do have elections. Assad won his elections by huge landslide victories. International observers, too. According to Daniel Kovalik, he's confirming the comment that I made just a little while ago. He's a human rights lawyer, peace activist, professor of international human rights, University Pittsburgh School of Law. And he's saying basically this formation of an independent Kurdish state is an excuse for the U.S. to appropriate the oil-rich eastern Syria. It's about the money. It's about the oil. That's why we went into Afghanistan, get that oil pipeline right away. And as a side benefit, all the opium here. As I mentioned before, there is a Turkish military convoy being sent to the borders with Syria to reinforce its positions in occupied Afrin. Now, over in Iran, we're starting to get what may be some mixed signals, but we'll see. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani says Tehran will continue cooperation with Europe in their multilateral nuclear deal if the remaining parties to the landmark accord can meet Tehran's expectations during their upcoming ministerial meetings, which I think may actually be happening now. Yesterday, Rouhani made some phone calls to the leaders of the other states that signed the Iran nuclear deal. And he said the results were disappointing because what he was getting, and he was talking primarily about Angela Merkel, is a lot of talk about commitments to Tehran, but little in the way of actual working details. How's it going to be done? How are we going to make this happen? It's one thing to say, we're going to do this, but you got to have a blueprint. And Tehran is not getting that. So they're hoping that at the meeting, which they're having, I guess, right now, that there'll be something substantive, something concrete that basically what Iran is looking for is European economic guarantees that will allow Iran to survive the escalating U.S. sanctions on it. And I think Europe would be well advised to go along with that, because the alternative is another war in the Mideast with the potential to go nuclear. But we know that the U.S. is promising financial sanctions against the other members of the Iran nuclear deal if they don't pull out of it. The U.S. is clearly weaponizing their sanctions process. Okay, now, Iran is saying that if the nuclear deal falls apart and the U.S. keeps throwing more sanctions, that they will retaliate by blocking the Strait of Hormuz, which is this very narrow choke point. And if that were to happen, oil exports to the United States could drop as much as 13%. And you think gasoline prices are bad now, they would be horrific should that happen. The U.S. Navy is out there insisting they are ready to protect freedom of navigation in the Straits of Hormuz amid the Iran threat. I am hoping by that they mean they will provide military escort to the oil tankers, as opposed to actually opening fire on the Iranian warships, which would, of course, open the door to the war with Iran that everybody wants. Iran's Judiciary Chief Sadiq Amoli Larijani has warned that the U.S. and the MKO, also known as MEK, it's a terrorist group, are basically collaborating to foment insecurity in Iran. This is another confirmation that the rioting going on in Iran is not an organic grassroots expression of the people. It is being fanned up by agent provocateurs. It's a replay of 1953, the overthrow of Mohammad Mossadegh, and 2009, the attempted overthrow of Ahmadinejad. And hopefully they will do no better this time than they did in 2009. But of course, if they don't, then they'll find a pretext for war. The problem that we're all dealing with right now is that the U.S. and its allies have gone so far down this war path, they can't turn around. They're committed. They've literally bet the barn, all of their nation's wealth, on being able to conquer the world and bring back Bretton Woods. And if the U.S. were to lose, they would lose big. This country would be absolutely destroyed. Over in Yemen, the number of Yemenis fleeing Hodeidah tops 121,000. The UN are desperately trying to get in there with food, emergency kits, and other life-saving support. The OCHA is saying after the partial calm of the last few days, air raids were carried out near the Hodeidah-Sanaz Road and Hodeidah Airport. Apparently, intensive airstrikes were reported on the 4th of July in the southern Zaid district. So the fight is not over. It's still ongoing. And I can understand why the Yemenis are going to go the distance to protect that port, because without it, they will be starved to death. All right, over in Israel, they have partly completed, or continuing the demolition of Al-Khan al-Amar. It's being described as a mini Nakba. And in this article that came on out of Middle East Monitor, there's a quote here that I want to read to you. The scenes of brutality and abuse were recorded for all to see, horrible and almost unbearable. Palestinian children were in a panic, screaming and watching the forced evictions and abuse of their parents by Israeli police and soldiers. Mothers were dragged along the ground and tied up. Their backs were stood on by Israelis, and their faces were buried in the sand. Now, a little quote from George Orwell. If you want a vision of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. It seems like we're getting very, very close here. There had been a group of European envoys who wanted to visit this village, a solidarity visit, and Israel blocked them, saying it's a closed military zone now. These were diplomats from Belgium, Finland, France, Ireland, Italy, Spain, Switzerland, and the EU as a whole, who wanted to visit the school in the village of Khan al-Amar, which is funded by several European countries. But they were turned back. So the issue is going to be that Israel, in demolishing this village, is going to be destroying the property of these countries. Israel won't care. But as of right now, they demolished 9 homes and 3 agricultural buildings. And as of now, 62 Palestinian Bedouins are now homeless. And not realizing how the optics on this look, apparently a bunch of the illegal settlers gathered to watch the demolition of Al-Khan al-Amar and basically to celebrate. They thought it was a great thing. Israeli soldiers were using excessive force against innocent civilians, communities of shepherds, and the settlers decided just to celebrate the event, awaiting the complete destruction of the Palestinian community. So unfortunately, while I'm aware that many Israelis do not support these policies, obviously those who have moved into the illegal settlements, they have a particular worldview. They want the land. They want the Palestinians gone. That's it. That's the beginning and the end of it all. UN officials are calling for an end to West Bank demolitions and respect for international law. Talk about optimism here. But the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in the occupied Palestinian territory issued a statement basically expressing serious concern over the demolitions and related events in vulnerable Palestinian communities in the central West Bank. But they won't be able to do anything about it because the only part of the UN that actually has any enforcement is the Security Council. And were anything against Israel to go to the Security Council, Nikki Haley would be jumping up and down going, veto, 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 veto. Oh, you people, you're so unfair to Israel. You're just a bunch of anti-Semites and Jew haters. Down in Gaza, and the march for the right of return is continuing again. The hospitals are now completely overflowing with wounded, and the less seriously injured people are being sent home to be cared for by their families. And we're not talking first aid here. We're talking about treating and keeping clean and disinfected things like amputated stumps. So it is a humanitarian disaster. Now, there's this group. It's called Socialist International. It's a global association of 140 political parties, including 35 parties currently in governments. And it's endorsed the Palestinian-led BDS. All right, we're going to be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And at this point, we have to step on back and say, what's been going on? Because for as long as I've been growing up, the U.S. government has always framed these military interventions as bringing democracy to the world, saving people from an evil tyrant. And more recently, it's like they've started to discard that pretense because nobody's believing them anyway. And the United States government is just saying, all right, everybody sees us engaged in hegemonic domination, so let's just go with that. We can't hide it anymore. It's very obvious that the United States is invading all of these countries for reasons of wealth. So that's the Pentagon's new mission statement: neocolonialism and hegemony. As I said before, we're the bad guys this time. Okay, so let's talk about the economic news here. Trump's $500 billion trade threat makes China's already battered investors shiver. Now, Trump's tariffs go into effect in just a few hours. And in point of fact, he's, according to Bloomberg, he's already talking about raising them even more. And supposedly, once the U.S. tariffs are in place, China will have their retaliatory tariffs, which means everything made in China is about to go through the roof. And that includes the stuff that's on the shelves at the big box stores. A lot of the stuff that you buy off of eBay comes from China. That's all going to, it's all going to get hit. And the government will get that money from your pocket, not from China's pocket. It's another hidden tax, and it will slow down commerce. Because a lot of people are running so tight, they'll look at things and say, if it was a little cheaper, I might buy it, but no, I can't. They're right on the edge. That slight increase in price, well, it's not slight, it's significant, 25%. Will cause a lot of people to put their wallets back in their pockets and say, I can live without that. This could really hit global commerce. And because so much of domestic economic activity is tied up, entangled with global trade, the effects will be felt inside the individual nations, especially this one. Especially this nation where manufacturing is only just now starting to recover from 30 years of neglect, especially inside this nation where nobody wants our GMO agriculture. We're really going to feel it. We're going to feel that here. Now, here's an interesting little article. It's from the Daily Bell, and it says the state of New Jersey has basically just signed its own death warrant. And they talk about this interesting little story. 2 years ago, New Jersey's richest resident, hedge fund billionaire David Tepper, decided to move himself and his business to Miami Beach. Now, Tepper earned more than $6 billion from 2012 to 2015, and he was getting tired of New Jersey's high taxes. High income tax, high property tax, estate tax, inheritance tax, and he decided to move to Florida, which is a state with a zero income tax. And Tepper is going to save hundreds of millions of dollars each year. And of course, he'd be living in Florida. Now, anyone with some common sense would have at least acknowledged the possibility that a guy like Tepper is going to consider moving away to save a few $100 million. But New Jersey, supposedly, was caught completely by surprise. And he's not the only one. A lot of the state's residents have left because of the high taxes, and they're seeking more business-friendly, tax-friendly environments. States without or with very, very low taxes. And it's leaving New Jersey's budget with a gaping hole in it. So what is New Jersey doing? Trying to lure these people back? No, they just raise taxes yet again. They can't see the problem. I understand that they're desperately broke. Everybody's desperately broke. But you can't just keep raising taxes. After a while, you're up against the law of diminishing returns. You will drive away the most productive segments of your society. They're going to go someplace rural, and they'll build it up. We talked about the life cycle of nations. There may be life cycles of cities, of states, where they're prosperous, and then the government gets reckless. They start overtaxation, and it all collapses. Anyway, we're coming up here on another commercial break, and when we come on back, we'll have a little bit of news about Tesla. There's been a new allegation being brought up about it. We'll be back after these words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the economic news, and I want to talk a little bit about Tesla. Now, it's no secret that a lot of Tesla's top executives are choosing to leave the company. That, of course, is making investors very, very nervous, along with the fact that Tesla is struggling to just reach his production goal that was promised to the investors. And even to the extent of setting up an assembly line inside a giant tent. It's 2 football fields long. But a lot of people are very, very concerned. Now, I'm going to go into the story, but I want to preface it with a reminder that automobile manufacturers are very competitive. They don't want new competitors to come along. Some of the established automakers are now coming into the market with competing electric cars. And so it's a very tight marketplace. And that's another factor where everyone's saying Tesla is just going into this huge cash burn through to get these Tesla 3s out there while the market's about to be flooded with other electric cars at a time when a lot of people aren't really buying cars. But there's an article over at adventuresincapitalism.com in which they're raising the possibility that the Tesla Model 3 may be the new Theranos. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, Theranos was this company and a technology that turned out to not work. And this lady, Elizabeth Holmes, created Theranos, went through a lot of publicity events, raised additional capital, and basically ran it as a Ponzi scheme until it all fell apart. And he points out that most of the people working at Theranos thought everything was okay. Only a few senior executives actually knew that something was wrong and the technology didn't work as advertised. So this website is basically coming on out and saying that there may be an issue with the Tesla Model 3. We know the Tesla and the Tesla 2 work just fine, except for an occasional exploding battery. But considering how value engineered and how rushed the Tesla Model 3 is, there may be an issue that has not yet come to light. And we know how secretive the car business can be. Look at the Volkswagen diesel emissions scandal. But again, there's a lot of hostility toward Tesla. The old car companies don't like new car companies. Look what they did to DeLorean. Okay, everyone's talking about the U.S. economy is doing great. The stock market ended in the green, so the money junkies can have a relaxing weekend. The government says unemployment has never been lower. Inflation is not too bad. GDP is up. There is a disconnect between these numbers and other indicators, one of them being over at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, where I posted a link to a chart there showing the labor participation rate over the last 10 years. It is clearly trending downward. So there's something there. Right now, this article out of IMT Online really says it all. Right now in the United States, there are a record number of people aged 85 and older who are still having to work because their pensions were defunded. Social Security isn't covering the cost of living. That's a big part of it. Inflation is driving up the cost of everything. So right now, over 255,000 Americans, 85 years and older, were working this last year. And they're working as crossing guards, farmers and ranchers, even truckers. Another article on the same line from IntelliHub. Record numbers of Americans being worked to death. And the age for working people in America has risen as the elderly are forced to work in order to survive, as inflation continues to engulf the nation. Now, if you are you're my age, you probably remember back in 1959, the price of a candy bar was 5 cents, and they were a lot bigger than today's so-called king-size candy bars, which cost anywhere from $1.50 to $2. That's what these elderly people are having to deal with. They prepared for a life as they knew it when they were younger and a reasonable amount of inflation. They weren't ready for this. Here's another article that this is an Investment Watch blog, and it's reinforcing something I've been saying. As we witness the retail Mageddon, the finger of blame is pointed at e-commerce. Oh, it's all the fault of Amazon. It's all the fault of this. It's a website or that website. But the reality is e-commerce only accounts, it's less than 10% of the total volume of retail sales. Amazon looks amazingly impressive because it's all just 1 or 2 centers rather than brick and mortar stores spread out across the landscape here. But the remaining 90% of retailers are suffering for other reasons. The people have no money to buy things with. That's what's going on. The wealth of this nation has been sucked dry. And it's either piled up at the top with the money junkies, it's in Wall Street, it's in Israel, or most of it is in that war machine. And we're coming up on the point where there will be nothing left. Nothing left at all. There was a movie that came out, it was a while ago. It was called The Last Picture Show. And it was actually filmed in black and white. And it was about the arrival of the Great Depression in this small town and how eventually the movie theater had to close down, hence The Last Picture Show. I'm seeing that around this neighborhood here. The number of retail vacancies is going up, but more than that, major retailers like Toys R Us is gone, Circuit City's gone, Babies R Us is gone. It's happening. They don't want to admit it, but I think the next recession is already here. Turning over to Great Britain, as you know, there is a big fight going on where Theresa May is under pressure to come up with a Brexit deal, but Theresa May herself is a globalist and is trying to push back. Now, she's struggling to unite the cabinet at a Crunch Checkers Summit Marathon meeting at Theresa May's country residence, and she's out there literally threatening the cabinet members, saying there are plenty of talented Tory members of Parliament who will take these cabinet jobs if they dare to quit over her EU plan. And the reason some of them are talking about quitting is that Theresa May is talking about Great Britain continuing to follow and abide by European Union court rulings after the Brexit. In other words, what Theresa May is trying to sell them is a Brexit in name only. And Great Britain will still be entangled up with the Eurozone economically. They'll still be under the jurisdiction of Brussels. And they'll still have that open borders issue. So it's getting tense over there. Over in Poland, Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki, botched that one pretty good, has warned the EU to listen to its increasingly disenfranchised citizens, respect the member states, and face up to reality, saying that the time has come to understand that the member states are sick and tired of the refugee crisis. The ordinary people of the EU are sick and tired of the refugee crisis. And EU has got to do something about it. They've got to listen to the people, or they're going to risk, who knows, an uprising, a civil war. But we're seeing this all over, where the globalists are apparently entrenched in all of these governments, like Angela Merkel, and they're willing to literally defy their own populations, expose their populations to increased crime and hardship for this dream of a one-world government, or for George Soros' next check, whichever comes first. And it's backflashing. Apparently there was a huge march over in the German city of Cottbus. Thousands of Germans protesting against Angela Merkel and the open borders issue. And it's a growing movement. Here in the United States, it's been an interesting event up on the Canadian border. And there was this Canadian fisherman, Nick Brown, and it was a fishing boat, and they were fishing, and they were accosted by a U.S. immigration vessel, a boat, who basically came on in and said, we're going to have to search your boat, we may have to seize your boat, we're looking for illegal immigrants. At which point, the Canadian boat's captain very politely informed the U.S. ship that they were in Canadian territorial waters. And they had no right to be there. And obviously, had there been anybody on the boat that was not allowed into the United States, they wouldn't be an illegal immigrant because they weren't in the United States. But apparently, the crew of the U.S. vessel were described as, quote, typical American bullies, who apparently weren't paying attention to their ship's instruments, their navigation, or simply didn't care that they had gone into Canadian territorial waters. Now, as you know, the protests against immigration and customs enforcement are continuing. They've actually been going on for a long time. And there was this interesting little video from 2017. This was up in Oakland, where ICE officials were doing a bust, and these liberal protesters were out front screaming, oh, it's terrible, it's terrible, it's terrible what you were doing. But what the ICE officials were doing is they were busting up a child sex trafficking ring. And that's what these liberal protesters were protesting, was the busting up of a child sex trafficking ring. It wasn't a secret. The ICE officials tried to tell them, this is a sex trafficking ring, a child sex trafficking ring. No, 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 no. You can't do that. You can't do that. I guess the liberals are betting that even child sex molesters can vote Democratic in the coming election. But it's all about jingoism and slogans and just getting that sound bite in your head that you can make you feel that you're fighting a just cause even though you don't know what the heck you're talking about. And a good example of that is another of the arguments that the pro-open borders people are always talking about is the illegal immigrants' constitutional right to due process. Now, as you know, Donald Trump has come on out with a very reasonable suggestion. When people are caught in this country without the official proper documentation, they are taken to the border and sent home. That's it. And the open borders people are up in arms saying, no, 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 they've got to be kept in the United States. They've got to be fed. They've got to have their day in court. They've got to go through the due process, and there'll be appeals and lawyer fees and all the rest of that, and they're entitled to that. Wrong. Throughout the years, the Supreme Court has repeatedly ruled foreign nationals have no due process rights inside the United States. Illegal immigrants are entitled to considerably less immigration due process than the open borders people want you to think. The U.S. can exclude them at will. The president has the authority to do this. Now, Congress could act to streamline the removal and provide the type of no-hearing framework the president has suggested. In fact, it has already done so in the past for certain classes of aliens. According to the latest poll, immigration is now the top issue for voters in this country. And that may be why the Democrats' numbers are in decline. Because the Democrats have aligned themselves with the open border, let's have an illegal immigrant on every street corner in America agenda. And middle America is saying, no, enough. Just like the people of Europe, it's gone on way too long. It has brought crime to our streets. We've got MS-13 running all over the place. Drug trafficking, they busted an illegal at the border carrying something like $100,000 worth of methamphetamine. And yes, they did take her kid away from her. So it will be, the Democrats did want to make it an issue for November, but I think they've hoisted on their own petard with this one. Now, getting into the world of political correctness, as you know, not too long ago, the BBC's controller of comedy commissioning, Shane Allen, basically said that Monty Python's Flying Circus could never exist today. If you're going to assemble a comedy team, it's not going to be 6 Oxbridge white blokes. It's going to be a diverse range of people who reflect the modern world. Now, Terry Gilliam, who is now out with his new film, The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, he's saying, we're just the guys who got together that made the comedy show. And you can't just put comedy together like a boy band where you've got one of each. You've got a black, you've got this, you got that. And he said Monty Python was actually very diverse for the time. They had 3 grammar school boys, one a poof, meaning gay, and Terry Gilliam was a Yank. And he goes around today saying that he tells everybody he's a black lesbian inside. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, as you know, to counter the very positive image of Russia coming out of the World Cup, Great Britain took advantage of a couple that apparently fell victim to contaminated recreational drugs. to try and revive the Sergei Skripal poisoning case. And oh my goodness, they must have come into contact with something that was contaminated that we missed cleaning up. And then, of course, it was pointed out to them that Novichok couldn't have lasted from March until now. It would decompose all on its own. And rather than go back and admit that yet another piece of propaganda had fallen apart, they're upping the ante again. Well, if this is not the same Novichok that was used on Sergei Skripal, this is another terrorist attack. It's another Russian terrorist attack on our soil that targeted 2 whole people. Well, in this case, these 2 people have no connection to Russia. It's not like they're a former spy or anything. In fact, one of them is a registered heroin addict. And again, to find out if you're being lied to, and boy, we sure are in this case. And they've got Scotland Yard in on it, and they've got Portendown in on it, and they've denoticed the newspapers on all of this stuff here. Why would anybody in Russia target these 2 very unimportant people in the middle of England with this Novichok poisoning, just as Russia was looking good in the World Cup? This is obviously such a setup. And the people who are pushing this lie really must think we're all idiots out here. That we're just going to get this spoon-fed propaganda, and we'll believe because it's coming from the government here. Another little bit of news here from the world of political correctness. Back in 2014, there was this political science professor, John McAdams, and he wrote a post criticizing a female student instructor for trying to shut down a debate about gay marriage. And he cited it as an example of liberals trying to suppress free speech. We talked about that earlier in the show. And basically, McAdams was suspended for saying that liberals are trying to shut down freedom of speech. But he sued the school in 2016, insisting his contract promised him academic freedom and free expression protections. And earlier today, the Wisconsin court ordered the university to reinstate the professor with unimpaired rank, tenure, compensation, and benefits. But that's exactly what's been going on. Liberals are trying to silence freedom of speech, and if they can't browbeat you into it, that's what political correctness is, tricking you into voluntarily not saying what you're thinking out of concern that you might offend somebody somewhere in the solar system. We'll be right back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And we're going to go ahead and open up the phone lines, and we're going to take a phone call from Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I thought we were in a big, fat, ugly bubble. I don't believe any of these economic numbers, Mike, because they lie to us on everything else.
They really do.
You know, this. If it was so, I mean, what do they say? Hispanics are, the unemployment for them has never been so low. And they said the same thing about African Americans.
Yeah.
That's because they're not counting anybody after a certain amount of time.
Well, they're not actually counting anything. It's all arrived at statistically.
So what you're seeing is all about perception. Mike, I'm telling you, this trade thing, this can go for either bad or worse because it's not good for anybody. And I hate to break this to you, but we're only 15% of China's market. There's a big world out there. They can find somebody else to go that'll buy their products. You know, I mean...
well, that's what it's really all about, is the U.S. is trying to get everybody to go through them. As long as trade is denominated in U.S. dollars, it goes through the U.S. banking system, even if the sender and receiver are on the other side of the planet. And there have been a lot of complaints that the U.S. banking system, under pressure to stop terrorism and money laundering and tax evasion, is getting more abusive and aggressive and blocking transfers, freezing funds. It's a cash grab out there, and it's only accelerating the rest of the world saying, we're going to just do business between ourselves and let the U.S. go off and do its meltdown someplace else.
And Mike, they are putting tariffs on pork, the Chinese. They own like the world's largest pork company here, right? Like Smithfield.
Yes.
So how's that work out? I mean, I don't understand that. Will they be exempt since they own them?
No, I don't think so, because American companies manufacturing in China have the same problem. Even though the company is headquartered here in the U.S., when the products are manufactured in China and brought across the border, they get hit by the tariffs.
And Mike, I watched a real quick video. It was about like like a woman took a train ride on their fast train, and you can't see them up close, but you can see all the ghost cities they built. And
yes.
That's what they use to like invest in their country, while we just gave the money to Wall Street. So they built the city, their like infrastructure. All these stops between on the train, the stops would lead to one of these ghost cities. So eventually, they got infrastructure already set up, for the future.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously they got to keep it maintained.
The name Ghost City, I think, is a misnomer. These are, if you want to call them, virgin cities. They're vacant cities, but they're ready to go. And China did invest huge amounts of money building them. I've looked at many of them through Google Earth, and they are quite amazing. And when you compare them to some of our American cities that are just being allowed to rot on the vine, like Baltimore and Chicago, it's amazing how forward-thinking the Chinese are here.
That's why the art of war, Trump. I hope he read that book, because I don't think he did, though. Because we're getting in over our head here. You can't. You're going to take on the world. The world will start trading between themselves, and they're not going to use the dollar. That's what's going to happen. They're going to form their own trade.
It's already happening. And everybody's trying to do that. They do get attacked, and they understand that. That when you stop using the U.S. dollar, you go on the U.S. government's to be invaded list.
But when it's up against the whole world, Russia and China, there ain't no way you're going to beat them. So throw in Turkey, Iran, North Korea, Germany, and France, and all these. As long as they join up. But if they start all these trade unions and stuff, all you have to do is stop using the U.S. dollar, and then before you know it, Mike, it's going to be too late for the U.S. to do anything about it, because we'd have hyperinflation here, and all the dollars will come back to the U.S., and it would be a mess, But so I don't know what's going to happen, but it's just not a good. We're not in a good moment in time.
No, we're not. We're not. I'm still convinced we're headed for a Soviet Union-style collapse in this country. And we, the American people, are going to have to be ready and have the courage to stand up and decide for ourselves what the next nation will be on these lands. And I think the Constitution and the first 13 amendments are a good start. But only time will tell. But I can't see that this country can survive much longer. They're either going to get into this war and lose it, or they're going to get into this war and it's going to go nuclear, or the economy is going to collapse and the whole shebang is going to come crashing down, which I think would be what would be best for the world as a whole.
And Mike, could maybe all this trade thing be the beginning of a new, of a reset? Of a new global currency, that could be like there's a rumor of that too. Oh, it's a global reset, or I don't know. I'm not in that center of power, and we're not.
Well, there's talk that Trump's trade wars could lead certainly the United States, but possibly the entire world, into a global recession starting next year sometime. And whether you want to call that a reset or not, but it would be a bad thing. But at some point, there has to be a reset. Somebody has to say, all of this debt, it's all imaginary numbers. If the money to pay it doesn't exist, it's got to be written off. But the private central bankers came up with this system to make themselves rich on the backs of your labor and to basically put themselves in power over the civil governments of nations.
Yep. All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates just now rejoining our network, and we're going to take another phone call from Erica in Kansas. Aloha, Erica. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. You need to check your email. Subject line: labor participation rate is missing. Did you hear me?
I need to check my email subject.
Yes, check it right now.
I'm not seeing anything in my email about. Yeah. That's you emailed that to me earlier today. But when I went out to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, I found it. I found that graph, and I emailed it back to you.
Oh, okay, but I just wanted to make sure that you at least got that and were aware of it.
Well, I did get it, and but I did find the same information at a different location in the Department of Labor Statistics. They may have just changed the website. Anyway, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Mike in Virginia. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, what I find particularly disturbing is the lack of courtesy and really hostility for other people's views. And what I found really disturbing was that guy Jimenez stole a hat off a little kid sitting in a restaurant with his parents. And that was absolutely outrageous. I'm in my mid-60s, and I'm not in very good health. So I would have a difficult time defending myself. I live in Southwest Virginia, so I'm in kind of like friendly Trump territory. But if I live, let's say, in a more urban environment, you know, like in D.C. or Baltimore or L.A. or Chicago, I would think twice or thrice before I would wear a MAGA hat or a Trump-supporting T-shirt, or even put the Trump bumper sticker or Patriot bumper stickers on my car for fear of being vandalized. And it's a sad state of affairs when people have to worry about such things, don't you think?
I absolutely agree with you, and it's a question of, are you going to give in to being terrorized by the liberals into rejecting your own rights to freedom of expression? Now, as I was saying some time ago, if you are living in an area where the liberals are behaving this way and you don't want to knuckle under to them, you might want to think about going through whatever your local government requires for training and get some pepper spray, because that is going to be a deterrent. Frankly, if I'd been in that Whataburger with a pepper spray and that guy had grabbed the hat off the kid, I would have unloaded the full can into his face. Because that's assault. What that guy did to the kid was assault.
I know what's a wonder that the kid's father didn't stop the guy and kick his ass.
Well, I imagine it happened too quickly because the guy grabbed the hat and ran out of the restaurant. But fortunately, it was on video, and the assailant's boss identified him, fired him, and reported him to the police.
Well, it remains to be seen, how far this might be carried out this summer. I just hope it doesn't get any worse. Thanks for taking my call. You got a great show, and have a good weekend.
All right, thanks an awful lot, and we're going to switch over to Terry in California. Aloha, Terry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, you mentioned about the illegal aliens that join the military to become citizens, and their heart's really not in the fight for this country.
Yes.
I'd just like to get your thought on this angle. How about when our troops don't anywhere mean to diminish their courage or their resolve or their professionalism, get over and fight a battle in the Middle East somewhere, and they realize that the war's all for Israel and the bankers and not for the U.S. government. So they might be up against the same problem there. And one thing that keeps the troops on our side, of course, I mean, again, I don't mean to diminish the troops, but is the fact that we've always had superior firepower. You know, we have air where the enemy has in a lot of cases. We've had superior weapons. But what happens when they come up against a formidable enemy like the Russians and the Chinese, and you know gets a lot rough, a lot rougher.
Yes.
So, they're going to realize possibly that all this is, for something else and not our country.
Well, I'm sure that's probably going to be a factor in the morale there, and it's for that reason that people who are on active military service are being isolated from the independent media and the internet, and they are daily propagandized by their commanding officers about we're here for democracy, we're here for so forth. A lot of them see through it. But there's also a lot of peer pressure to perform as well. I still think the illegal immigrants allowed into the military was not going to be a really good idea, and apparently the military is now asking them to step on out, and it's not because they're immigrants. Apparently the issue is that many of them are just not physically suited to infantry work. They lied on their paperwork to get in. They can't pass a background check for those positions that are classified. Anyway, Terry, thanks an awful lot for the insight, and we're going to go back to Peter in Los Angeles. Apparently his phone had cut on out when I tried to connect with him. So, Peter, what's on your mind?
Michael, just to dovetail with what Terry was saying, a couple of years ago, I know you talked about it, and it was actually written about, a couple articles, how it was becoming increasingly a problem, especially in the Army and the Marine Corps, of gang members, the high presence of gang members who are coming in to get military training.
Yes.
And I think that could be, a significant reason why this is happening. That's
a good one.
You remember that, though?
Yeah, I remember that.
Remember we talked?
Yeah.
Another thing I was going to bring up was on the civility thing, and relating it also to the flight of apparently young millennial white people leaving the Democratic Party, and their policy, the Democratic policy party, and they're always throwing out white supremacists, white supremacists, white supremacists. And they've got to be confronted on campuses and in schools with everybody has a safe place except them. Everybody needs a safe place from them. And to the best efforts of the United States to stop a hyphenated white identity, they've always encouraged a Hispanic identity or an Asian identity and a black identity, but they've always discouraged a white one. It's happening, I think, anyways, because they see, the deck is stacked against them in a lot of ways, and I don't know why they would stay with the Democrats. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, that you make a point that all of this identity politics and the anti-white message coming out of the Democratic Party is definitely going to turn off those people who are members of the Democratic Party who happen to be white, as well as those who still think that racism in any direction is wrong. And they're going to be leaving. The bottom line, though, is the Democrats' poll numbers are going down. And the more extreme they become, the more violent they become, the more openly they attack freedom of speech, our basic constitutional rights. They're sending the message. They want a world in which only their agenda is put out there for consumption by the public, and any opposing, dissenting views have to be silenced.
Isn't it a coincidence, Mike, that the media now, the big media organs like the Times and other Posts and all that, are now coincidentally coming out at the same time that Israel wants to shut down freedom of speech, and now they're throwing their weight behind that as well, just to draw connect a couple of dots. But there's one more thing I wanted to talk about, and you had that lady on yesterday talking about civility.
Yes.
And you had somebody earlier that talked about the 68 Democratic convention and the riots that were there and all that, except that was not orchestrated by billionaires from the outside. Like the difference now is that this is orchestrated by the deep state. We had Loretta Lynch coming out and asking people to take to the streets when she was still Attorney General.
Yes.
We had Eric Holder, remember, trucking people in on that Trayvon Martin thing.
Yes.
Protesters.
Yep.
They actually trucked in people.
Yep.
We have that Robert Kramer, who, remember him, the Democratic operative that Project Veritas caught?
Yes.
That was sabotaging Bernie Sanders and Trump campaigns, where there would be fights and violence and people got hurt. Police got hurt.
Yes.
And he was caught admitting it. And this is all funded by Soros, the biggest donor to the Democratic Party, and Hillary Clinton. And Robert Kramer, the guy who was being paid to, like, the brown shirt tactics, exact classic brown shirt tactics of starting brawls at Trump rallies, which is what he did. He not only was he paid by the Democratic National Committee and was affiliated with the Clintons, his wife was a Democratic congressman from Chicago, and he met with Obama in the White House like 40 times.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's totally orchestrated, and that's the difference. Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin and all those guys, hey, there was an unpopular war that they were going after, and they weren't getting any help from anywhere else. But this is by design.
It is very much by design here, and this attack on the First Amendment, back when Israel started lobbying for an Israeli exception to the First Amendment, I said, if they get that, it's the end of the First Amendment, because they'll carve out other exceptions for vaccines, GMOs. Now we've got these liberal lights out there saying that, well, we really can't have justice in this country if there's freedom of speech. And that's a very dangerous direction. And that may be coming down all the way from George Soros himself. Anyway, Peter, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And here's an interesting little story. Apparently over in the eastern province of South Africa at the Sibuya Game Reserve, some poachers snuck on in, apparently intent on obtaining some rhinoceros horn, which in some parts of the world is considered very valuable for its medicinal benefits. It's sort of considered a natural form of Viagra, which will tell you why the demand is so high. So these poachers went on in there, and apparently while they were in there looking for a rhinoceros, they were set upon by a pride of lions. And at least 3 of the poachers are believed to have been eaten by the lions. And the lions left a head, some bloody limbs, and 3 pairs of shoes recovered from the scene. They also found hunting rifles and the axe used by the poachers to cut off rhino horns. A little bit of karmic come around there. But I mention this because I always get very upset with the vegans who come on out and say, oh, you can't eat the animals. The animals are so precious. You can't eat the animals. Here, have this synthetic thing that came out of a laboratory over there. And Claire and I are mostly vegetarian, but we understand humans are omnivorous. I did want to point out, though, that for you vegans and for you PETA people who are out there, the animals do not return your sympathies. They will eat you without hesitation, given a chance. Just want to put things in perspective a little bit there. Okay, over in Utah, as you know, civil asset forfeiture is being hideously abused. Originally, it was intended where the police could confiscate the wealth of real criminals. And then somebody came along and said, well, we shouldn't have to wait for them to actually be convicted of a crime. We We know this guy's a pimp from the car. We know this guy's a drug lord. Let's just grab the wealth. And then immediately the police started realizing they had a way of covering the shortfall in their budgets as the economy began to dry up. So there's this 2017 report on the Utah State asset forfeiture, and it says that they seized this $2.2 million in cash in 2017, and in this case, they definitely are trying to target the real criminals because most of this money came in drug investigations. In 13% of the cases, no criminal charges were filed. Okay. All right, I guess we lost our communication. Okay. Can you hear me? Are you on the air? Am I on the air?
My internet cord fell out. You're on the air.
I'm on the air. Okay. All right. Professional radio here. All right. So in Utah, they seized $2.2 million in cash, and apparently roughly $687,000 of it was routed back to law enforcement and drug courts. Now, in this case, it does look like they're trying to focus on real criminals, but we have heard all these other horror stories about how it's just being abused all across the country. John Oliver, when I was still watching last week tonight, he did a segment on the abuses of civil forfeiture that was just absolutely brilliant. Now, here's a good one. You're going to love this one. Students in Detroit sued the state of Illinois because the schools did not teach them to read. So stay with me on this. The judge threw the case out of court, and he said that literacy is integral to one's well-being, but there actually is no requirement in the Constitution for schools to promote students' literacy. So maybe they can't sue the state, but they could sue the school district itself for false advertising. Because isn't that what the public schools are already saying? Come here and we will teach you to read and write and build things. But I mean, apparently these kids came out of the Detroit schools unable to really read well. And that right there is definitely a crime. So the judge said there actually is no constitutional right to literacy. Therefore, the state couldn't violate it. And that's a sad state of affairs in our country, where students are coming out of the schools without an education, and they think litigation is the only thing they can do about it. Where are the parents? Where's the PTA? Didn't anybody notice that these kids were not being taught to read? Or is now literacy considered a sign of white supremacy and racism? Oh, how racist to want to teach these kids to whatever nonsense. We're going to take another break for commercials here. We got a caller waiting on the line, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go back to the phones to Mateus in Canada. Aloha, Mateus. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, regarding your last topic, just because the Constitution does not say that you have to do something does not mean that you don't have to do it. For example, the Constitution doesn't say that cars have to have working brakes, so you can't go start manufacturing cars with faulty brakes and then get sued and then say the Constitution doesn't say I have to have brakes.
Well, basically, you're agreeing with the judge in the case because the student lawsuit had been that they had a constitutional right to be given an education in the public school system, which they did not get. And the judge, while saying that, yes, they should have gotten the education, said that, no, the Constitution does not explicitly promise the people that you will be educated. I think the lawsuit would have been better directed at the school board itself.
I was just going to say that. The Constitution should be completely left out of this.
Yes.
Anyway, it's got nothing to do with the Constitution. It's got to do with common sense that schools are for learning how to read and write and do math. It's like obvious.
Well, not to the liberals. Schools are places of indoctrination.
Hey, do you think it's more humane regarding the open borders and immigration to trebuchet the parents separately, or to put the whole family together in the scoop and trebuchet them into the Crocodile Rio Grande as a family unit?
Well, I mean, as a hypothetical, of course, I think for single illegal immigrants, the trebuchets will work, but for whole families, you might want to use one of those air cannons.
And just the last thing, Stefan Molyneux, philosopher, has a very interesting idea, is that if you were having a block party outside your house, and everyone, it's a potluck, and everyone shows up and you're all having fun, and then some people you've never seen before, that they just show up with those little white takeout containers, and they just start filling up their containers full of your potluck, and then just leave. You know, that's going to be completely unacceptable. And
Yes.
That's exactly what's happening when you have illegal immigration that goes on the welfare system.
Yes, and especially for those who are sending part of that money back to their home country. It's a huge cash drain on this country.
Thank you very much, Michael. Have a great weekend.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. And I got a story I want to get to before I take the next phone call. Apparently, there's been another incident of somebody defending themselves with a legal firearm. Michelle Booker Hicks was paying for her gas at a Shell station down in Texas, and she saw a man climb into the car, which had her two sons, young infant sons, in the back. So she jumped into the front passenger seat and shouted at this man to stop. He ignored her, and so she shot him. So that is a good thing. That's why we, the people, should be allowed to have guns, because there is crime out there that the police is simply, they're not dealing with it. All right, let's see. We're going to go back to the phones. Art from Off the Grid, aloha. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, let's talk a little bit about the hypocrisy within the liberal left that is so blatant nobody can see it. We had just recently this feminist by the name of Kimberly Johnson, who is just aghast. She cannot understand why a black man who drives a BMW would have a pro-NRA, pro-Second Amendment bumper sticker and a pro-Tea Party sticker on his car. She just does not understand why this black man who drives a BMW does not simply just embrace the progressive left political agenda.
Boy, talk about prejudices and stereotypes.
Isn't the left like the ones who are so obsessed about inclusion and you can't racially profile and they're so overwhelmed with political correctness that it's just disgusting and makes you just want to regurgitate all over your breakfast plate. But here we have a feminist of all people, a feminist racially profiling a black man, because all blacks are supposed to be progressive. They're all supposed to be anti-gun. They're supposed to all be anti-Tea Party. They can't be pro-Trump. They can't. Are you serious? Really?
Yep. I'll tell you. Yeah, I mean, the liberals. It doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to be self-consistent. It's like when we were talking early in the show about that guy who started the walk away movement. Went into this camera store. He was recognized from the video, and the liberals working at the store refused to serve him. These are the same liberals who wanted to sue, actually did sue, this Christian baker out of business for refusing to bake a gay wedding cake. So it's a double standard, and it's hypocritical, but they don't care. The attitude of the liberal agenda is, I want what I want now. That's a force of nature. Don't you dare speak out against me.
Yeah, we can close down your business because you won't serve gay people. We can throw you in jail because you won't issue a marriage license to a gay couple. But we can also, at the same time, we can refuse to serve you based upon political ideology. Where does this make any sense? Then again, we live in a world where a 21-year-old black man from Bridgeport, Connecticut can be thrown in jail and given 42 months for a first-degree assault because he stabbed a guy in the leg who was one of 3 that were attacking him.
Yes.
You can't even defend yourself. This is the world we live in.
Yep.
It's ridiculous. The Party of Peace, Love, and Granola is calling for open harassment of political officials or anyone you just disagree with, to the point to where now we're seeing hostilities taking place in Whataburgers.
Well, I'll tell you, you're absolutely describing liberalism as granola, because what ain't fruits and nuts is going to be flakes.
Hey, Mike, thanks, man. Have a great one.
All right, thanks an awful lot, and we're going to switch over to Mark in Georgia. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Let's see. I guess we don't want to use the term useful idiots in their actual presence, but I understand the Parkland March for Our Lives is coming to Atlanta on the 29th of July, and I'd like to see about getting like-minded people to go say hi to them. And would you care to, I can tell you from experience, getting an emergency cranial rectal extraction is not fun or easy, but it's worth it. And when you're advocating gun control, have you people taken a serious look at how the crime statistics of places that have extremely strict gun control, and it's outrageous. Wouldn't it be better to have a militia to basically, where people, including holding the government accountable, like I think one of the functions of the militia should be to investigate, where the police are saying, well, never mind, it's okay. So what if a cop shot some 12-year-old boy with a toy gun? Oh, these things happen. Excuse me? You agree that we need to have a means of investigating where the government refuses to take an honest look at things, right?
We definitely. Well, that's the purpose of the independent media. Yeah, because I mean, especially after Sessions did that very obvious shutdown of the Imran Awan investigation. And by the way, there have been several very critical, very analytical articles about that all over the independent media today, pointing out on how it's the statement issued by Sessions' Justice Department that they found no evidence of any wrongdoing just does not stand up to close examination. So it is the job of the independent media to investigate what the government is doing in the face of a corporate media that has abandoned their responsibility to be a watchdog on government abuse.
Well, that's the thing. What I'm trying to get across, and I think we're, the independent media is doing a stellar job. I think that We Are Change is a good organization, and as soon as I have the funds, I tend to go through the training and set up my own branch and say, well, we need to look at all of these free killings, Columbine on up, and not saying, we're not saying that necessarily no one died. I'm saying if people died as claimed, then we need to make sure that the official narrative actually measures up. And it doesn't mean, it's like if people really did get killed in this, that, the other, a tragedy and it's a shame, but it's even more a tragedy if, us reading this thing that's playing to Jersey, like in Armenia, they had gun control, and then 1.5 million Armenians were killed off.
Yeah.
Just because they didn't have the means of defending themselves.
That's a common feature throughout the entire 20th century. Every genocide of the 20th century was preceded by a gun ban on the targeted population.
I do believe that people should be trained to use firearms with great safety for the law-abiding and grave peril for the law breakers, in the sense of, look, we're not going to drop the hammer, meaning the thing that's a firing pin, without moral constraint. But that doesn't mean if you're in imminent danger, if that's what's necessary, and including if those that are supposed to be protecting our rights become violators of our rights, there needs to be a way of saying, excuse me, just because you're wearing a badge does not mean that you can violate somebody else's rights. Whatever.
And there's actually a Supreme Court decision that backs that up. It's John Bad Elk versus United States. where basically...
Yeah. I'm concerned about how to express with due diplomacy and tact that civil asset forfeiture is thievery under the color of law. And if you attempt civil asset forfeiture with me, I'm not wishing you any harm, but know this: that color of law. There is no legislation that can legitimately be called law that violates a person's rights. All right, that's obvious, right? And I don't want to take that from a threatening posture, but say in a month or whenever I get my inheritance and I have a stack of bills and I'm going to go buy something like an RV to do my Do You Love Truth tour, I don't want some cop saying, well, where'd you get this money? And then the question becomes, do you have evidence that I've committed a crime? Do you have probable cause? And then I'll ask you again, where'd you get this money? And I'm going to tell you, and I'll say, if you do not have probable cause that I've committed a crime, know this: it's not that I don't trust you personally, it's that I don't know you, and I don't trust our current so-called law enforcement structure that is law in name only. Does that make sense?
Well, I don't know. If it were me, I just... Hello?
Yeah?
Yeah, you asked me a question. If it were me, I would just go along and say it's an inheritance. And if at that point he refuses to believe me...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, if he says, I don't believe you, and proceeds to try and grab my property, again, I don't want to die. I've had a very, very long life. I'm not ready to end it yet. So I don't want to get into an issue of a battle with a police officer. But if you really think about it, this whole civil forfeiture thing, it is a violation of the Fifth Amendment, where the government can't just take your property without compensation. And then there's the other part about you can't be deprived of your property without due process. Well, right now the defenders of civil forfeiture are saying this is the due process. The police officer sees something he thinks is suspicious and he can grab it. That's all the due process you get.
Yeah, then the problem becomes, well, hire a lawyer. And it's like, hire a lawyer with what? You just took my money. Yeah, well, he'll do it on contingency. Well, the lawyer knows that the game is... What the police do, what the police do when they know they have wrongfully grabbed some money from somebody, is they'll offer back half of it as long as the person signs a statement saying they will never sue and they will never talk about it. And most people will go for that deal rather than wait for years for the court system to rule that their property was wrongfully taken. It sucks. It's a rigged system. It allows the police to continue corruption. Anyway, listen, Mark, we're getting short on time, and I want to give some time to Rob in Illinois. Aloha, Rob. Thank you for waiting. What's on your mind?
Hey, that's yourself, that last, what you guys were talking about. That's how you know the Bolsheviks are running America.
Yeah.
The one day, and this is kind of related but not related, one day my friend of mine had bought a van, a used van, 200-something thousand miles on it, brought it, was bringing it home, him and his brother. They got in front of the house, and then the cops show up, and they're like, oh, your van, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, we just bought it. And they're like, well, how much did you pay for it? And they're like, what? And then they're like, and then they're like, where'd you get the money? It's literally in front of his, a Chicago suburb. Anyway.
Boy, that's really getting in there. I mean, that's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. They can't just come up and grill you about this stuff. Fortunately, we don't have that kind of problem here in Hawaii because, we paid cash for our car that we had to get after the Honda got stolen and stripped. And it was just money we'd saved up over time. We was just very fortunate that at the point where our car got stolen, we had already put together a replacement car fund, but it was all in cash. And boy, can you imagine if some cop had said, oh, it's got to be drug money from two 60-year-olds? We would have been stuck. We wouldn't have been able to get a car without having to get a car loan. And that puts us back in slavery to the banks again.
You can imagine, this is just a working man that just bought a used van and it can use some work, brakes, whatever. And it's got over 200,000 miles on it, and it's at least, 15 years old. And then they're still asking him, how much? Where'd you get the money? Like, like it's something.
That's ridiculous. Don't these police have real crimes to be dealing with? Or are they just that eager? Are they that dependent on civil forfeiture? And by the way, a lot of city police departments are, as their budgets have been cut. They've literally turned into policing for profit organizations where they'll literally have detectives looking for seizure opportunities. And that led to a very horrible incident in Malibu years and years ago when this stuff was just getting started up, and I was still in Southern California. And the Malibu police literally had a department looking for seizure opportunities, and they saw this oceanside property, and they said, I'll just bet there's some marijuana growing there, and if we raid it and find a marijuana plant, we get the property, and we get the... And they raided the place and shot and killed the owner. No marijuana anywhere. We got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be back for the last segment of our Friday show after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, last segment of our program today, and a couple of stories about computers and computer equipment. Everyone's talking about the onset of these smart homes. All the devices are connected with each other, and already they are creating problems in homes where the family is not living a Zen-like, serene calm. Like, there's a lot of friction, the marriage is in trouble, and apparently these smart homes can be used for harassment and even domestic abuse using these internet connected devices. They can be used to stalk and monitor the victims, changing door lock codes, turning lights on and off, changing the thermostat, playing loud music at random intervals. And of course, you'd think the first thing is unplug the device, turn it off. But the devices are sometimes solely controlled by the abuser, and trying to unplug the devices can result in even worse abuse. For anybody who's ever looked at the issue of domestic abuse as a permanent cycle, it's a complex psychology. And a lot of people will say, why don't the victims leave the abusing spouse? Very often they can't for psychological reasons. They may feel that they deserve it, that this is the best they can get. And domestic abuse is enough of a problem without automating it. Now, over in Russia, their search engine Yandex they've announced it's turning up dozens of Google documents that appear meant for private use, suggesting there may have been a data breach at Google. And Yandex, of course, has notified Google, saying that Yandex is finding what appear to be personal Google files. So, over at YouTube, a little bit of an embarrassment here. Sony Pictures put up the trailer for the movie Kali the Killer. Or at least they thought they did. They actually put up the entire movie, and people were looking at it and realized the 90-minute duration was a giveaway. That there was more in there than just highlights from the film. And it was up there for about 6 hours before it was removed. But of course, news of its availability had spread, and no doubt by now it's been copied off, and those films investors are not going to get their money back. Facebook has now apologized for censoring the Declaration of Independence as hate speech. Meanwhile, the Facebook marketplace has been exposed as a black market for illegal knockoff designer goods, including Gucci scarves, Louboutin heels, and World Cup footy shirts, even though it violates Facebook's own guidelines here. Now, there's another story here where apparently a French school banned the use of cell phones 4 years ago and saw a tremendous improvement in the students' social behavior. So stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. And have a good weekend. We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.